In this video, I'm going to share one of my compost tea recipes and talk about how I ensure the compost coming out of this yard is ready for use. Sure, this compost looks and smells amazing, but the dirty little secret is that most composters, including myself, have no idea what we've actually created. Most of us are not going to have the ability nor the desire to analyze compost underneath a microscope. So how is it that I can actually make a product out of here and feel fairly confident that what I've produced is good on the other end? The closer I am to exercising all of those best composting practices, the sooner I may be able to use it. The farther I am away, or more of those composting best practices that I break, I just need to add more time. This is a rule that I never try to break, is make sure that the material that you're composting with is from a known source, so that you're not going to bring something in that's going to give you some long-lasting detrimental effect. The next thing would be to try to get your ratios somewhere close to 60-40-10. So that would be 60% carbon, 40% nitrogen, with 10% of that 40% being of high nitrogen. And that would be things like your animal manures being of high nitrogen. I typically run this yard a lot higher on my animal manures, and that's one of the reasons why I'm in no hurry to have this material come out of here. Most of the compost that I'm making in here currently was put in the fall, and it won't come out probably until next summer. Another best practice that I try to adhere to is making sure that the piles are getting aerobically conditioned. And one of the ways that I'm able to facilitate that here in the chicken yard is just allowing chickens to do what they do. Every day I stack these piles up, and they work tirelessly all day to break them down. The last of those best practices is making sure that the compost itself doesn't dry out. Everything that's living needs water, including all the microbiology that's been created in these piles. I'm going to be making some compost tea this morning, and it's a really good idea if you're making some compost tea or extract that you have a pretty high degree of confidence that what you're making, what you're replicating, is the good stuff. Let me show you where I'm hiding the good stuff. I like to store my finished compost in bins and buckets, and I keep it somewhat in a resting state, segregated from the chicken's activity. And I want to say that this compost is probably somewhere around 15 months old, and this is what I'll be using this morning to make some compost tea. Good stuff. What I'm looking to do in my recipe is provide food for both fungal as well as bacterial growth. And I'm not looking to exclude bacteria, but I do skew a little bit more heavily towards something that's going to feed the fungi. I make my batches 30 gallons at a time, so the remainder of this will be filled up with water. Water is essentially the carrier for all the microbes and the nutrients. Basically what I start with is a 5-gallon paint strainer, and this can be picked up at most any hardware store. All the contents will be placed inside of this and placed in the liquid and suspended over the aeration wand. And I start with compost, fish hydrolysate powder, I add alfalfa pellets, I add kelp meal, I add worm castings. I also add a humic acid powder that's in a water-soluble form, azomite, which is basically just a rock dust, and backstrap molasses. One of the protocols that I've been following is to make sure that I aerate the water prior to adding all my compost and other inputs in. Humic acid powder, fish hydrolysate, azomite will go right through this paint strainer. And so when I'm putting all the contents in with this compost, I like to do it inside of a 5-gallon bucket. It'll all be contained within this bucket, and then I'll just clean this out, rinse it off inside of the barrel. The main reason why I like to put all of my inputs into a paint strainer is because I need this tea to be fairly clean and free from residual sludge, because the method of delivery for this is gravity fed through a garden hose. This is a portable system that I can take anywhere on my property. These paint strainers are reusable. This one's going on its 2nd year of use, and I just tie a knot in the top of it and use some baling twine to suspend it over the wand. And then anywhere from 24 to 48 hours later, depending on how warm it is outside, the tea will be ready. about 40 hours in right now, and we are ready. I'm going to go ahead and fill this up the remainder of the way, and we'll get this out this morning. What we're actually trying to do when we're making compost is replicating what nature does naturally. The problem for us is we don't have an unlimited amount of time to break that organic material down. So we have to accelerate it, and when we do, we run the risk of making a few mistakes. Making mistakes is completely fine if you're willing to be patient on the back end. So essentially, composting is nothing more than the acceleration of that decomposition process with applying the appropriate amount of time. And where those two things intersect, that's your perfect compost. There's no one right way to compost. There's a lot of different ideas out there, a lot of different methods of composting. And what I would encourage people to do is just go out there and to try to validate some of these things that you see people doing. So thanks for watching. Please consider subscribing to the channel and go out there and make some compost.